share, subscribe.
You know, there's something we don't talk about enough in this world. The weight of knowing something you wish you could forget. Tonight, I'm going to share with you 5 stories that have haunted me for years. Stories that came to me through whispered conversations, through people who needed to unburden themselves of truths too terrible to carry alone. These aren't just stories about Area 51. They're about the moments when ordinary people like you and me stumbled into something that shattered their understanding of reality. Something that made them question everything they thought they knew about the world we live in. Have you ever wondered what would happen if you discovered that the most classified secrets weren't locked away in government facilities, but scattered throughout our everyday lives, waiting for the wrong person to find them at exactly the wrong moment? What if the real horror isn't what they're hiding from us, but what happens when those secrets find their way into our hands? Before we begin this journey together, I need your help. If these stories move you, if they make you question what's really happening in the shadows of our world, please hit that like button. It tells me that this darkness we're exploring together matters to you. And if you're not already part of our community at Whisper and Wonders, please subscribe. We're working toward 10,000 souls brave enough to face these truths with us. And honestly, seeing that 98% of you watch but haven't subscribed yet makes me wonder if you're ready to fully commit to uncovering what lies beneath the surface. Your subscription gives us the confidence to dig deeper, to share the stories that others are too afraid to tell. And please, when you're done listening, leave a comment. Tell me about your own experiences with the unexplained, because I have a feeling that once you hear these stories, you'll realize you might have your own encounters to share. Now, let me tell you about Marcus Chon and the night everything changed for him in the most ordinary suburb of Henderson, Nevada. I still wake up in cold sweats 3 months later. The doctors say it's PTSD, that my mind is trying to process trauma. But they don't understand. I'm not traumatized by what happened to me. I'm terrified of what I might do next. My name is Marcus Chon, and until last December, I was a perfectly ordinary IT specialist living in Henderson, Nevada. You know, the type of neighborhood cookie-cutter houses with manicured lawns, the kind of place where the biggest excitement is usually Mrs. Patterson's dog getting loose again. I'd moved there specifically for the quiet, for the predictability. After years of urban chaos, I wanted boring. God, how I miss boring. It started with the garage sale. The old Kowalski place had been empty for months after Eleanor passed, and her nephew was finally clearing out decades of accumulated belongings. I wasn't planning to stop, but something about the way the morning light hit the tables made me pull over. You know that feeling when you're drawn to something for no logical reason? That's what happened. Most of it was typical estate sale, fair dusty. China, moth-eaten sweaters, books with yellowed pages. But tucked away on a card table in the back, almost hidden behind a stack of National Geographic magazines, was a small metal device about the size of a thick smartphone. It had a dark screen and several buttons along the side, with a telescoping antenna that extended about 6 inches. The housing looked military, that distinctive olive drab color with serial numbers etched into the metal. "What's this?" I asked. The nephew, a thin man in his 40s, who looked like he just wanted to be done with the whole ordeal. He glanced over, squinting in the morning sun. "Oh, that old thing? Found it in Eleanor's basement with a bunch of other junk. Some kind of radio, I think. Works, apparently. It was making static when I tested it yesterday." He shrugged. $20 and it's yours." Something about it fascinated me. Maybe it was the weight of it in my hands, solid, purposeful, like it was built to last. The craftsmanship was clearly military grade, far better than anything you'd find in consumer electronics. I handed over the 20 without really thinking about it. That night, I set it up in my home office. The device was surprisingly intuitive once I figured out the basic controls. It was indeed a radio specifically. It seemed to be designed for scanning frequencies. When I powered it on, it cycled through various channels automatically, picking up fragments of conversations, music, static, normal radio stuff. But as I played with it over the next few evenings, I started noticing patterns. Certain frequencies would make the device behave strangely. The display would flicker, the scanning would slow down, and sometimes I'd hear things that didn't quite sound like normal radio transmissions. The breakthrough came on a Thursday night. I was scanning through the higher frequencies, somewhere in the range where you usually only get static, or maybe some ham radio operators, when the device suddenly locked onto a signal. The display showed a frequency I'd never seen before, something far outside the normal broadcast ranges. What I heard made me sit up straighter in my chair. Double quotes ... vector 7-7-9er. Maintain altitude and bearing. Cargo is secure. Eta to Groom Lake. Approximately 47 minutes. Groom Lake. That's the official name for Area 51. My heart started pounding. This wasn't some conspiracy theory podcast or late-night radio drama. The voices were crisp, professional, using authentic military communications protocols. I'd heard enough real military chatter during my time as a contractor to recognize the genuine article. Over the next several nights, I became obsessed. I'd rush home from work, skip dinner, and spend hours scanning frequencies. The device seemed to have an almost supernatural ability to lock onto signals that shouldn't exist, conversations between pilots flying aircraft that weren't supposed to be in the air, ground control communications from facilities that didn't officially exist, coded transmissions discussing cargo and personnel movements that made my blood run cold. I started taking notes, cross-referencing what I heard with news reports and flight tracking websites. The patterns were undeniable. Every few days, I'd intercept communications about package deliveries or specimen transfers that would coincide with unexplained aircraft movements detected by aviation enthusiasts near Area 51. But it wasn't just the content that disturbed me, it was how the device seemed to be learning. Each night, it would find these classified frequencies more quickly, as if it was developing some kind of intelligence about where to look. The display would sometimes show readings that shouldn't have been possible, picking up signals from distances that defied the laws of physics. 3 weeks in, everything changed. I was listening to what sounded like a routine status report from some kind of research facility, when the voice on the other end said something that made my blood freeze. ... Be advised. We have a security breach. Someone is actively monitoring our communications. Signal strength indicates close proximity to Henderson area. Initiating Protocol 7 immediately. ... The transmission cut to static. Then, after a moment of silence that felt like an eternity, a new voice came through calm, measured and speaking directly to me. Hello, Marcus. I nearly fell out of my chair. The voice knew my name. Through that little radio device, somehow, someone was talking directly to me. We know you've been listening, the voice continued. We know you have questions. Would you like answers? Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to turn off the device, to throw it away, to pretend this never happened. But I couldn't. The need to know was stronger than my fear. Who are you? I whispered into the device, hoping it would somehow pick up my voice. We are the ones who've been watching you, Marcus. Watching and waiting. You have a gift and ability to hear things. Others cannot. That device you found wasn't random. Eleanor Kowalski was one of us, a long time ago. She was supposed to destroy it when she retired, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. She knew someone like you would eventually find it. The world tilted. Around me, Eleanor had been my neighbor for 2 years. A sweet old lady who brought me cookies and complained about the postal service. The idea that she had been connected to, whatever this was, seemed impossible. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "We want to offer you a choice, Marcus. You can walk away right now. Destroy the device. Forget what you've heard. Go back to your ordinary life. We'll make sure you're never bothered again." And the other option. There was a pause. "Then you keep listening. You learn the truth about what's really happening in the skies above your neighborhood, in the deserts outside your city, in the facilities that don't exist on any map. But understand, once you know, you can never unknow. Once you've seen behind the curtain, you become part of the machinery that keeps these secrets." I stared at the device, my hands shaking. Part of me wanted to smash it against the wall, to choose the safe path. But I thought about all those nights of wondering, all those intercepted transmissions that had consumed my thoughts. Could I really go back to pretending the world was ordinary? "I need time to think," I said. "You have until tomorrow night. Same frequency, same time. Choose wisely, Marcus. Some doors can't be unopened once you've walked through them." The signal went dead. I spent the next 24 hours in a state of barely controlled panic. I called in sick to work and paced around my house, the device sitting on my desk like a loaded gun. I researched Eleanor Kowalski online, finding nothing but obituaries and real estate records. I tried to convince myself the whole thing had been some kind of elaborate hoax, but the knowledge that someone had used my name, that they knew about my location, made that explanation feel hollowed out. When evening came, I found myself back in my office, staring at the device. At exactly 9:47 p.m., the same time as the previous night, it powered on by itself. "Hello again, Marcus. Have you made your decision?" I took a deep breath. "I want to know. Are you certain?" "There's no going back." "Uncertain." What happened next changed everything. The voice began telling me things about the aircraft I'd been hearing, about the programs being run in facilities scattered across the Nevada desert, about the cargo that moved through the night skies above seemingly peaceful suburbs like mine. They told me about crash retrievals and reverse engineering programs, about agreements made with entities that weren't entirely human, about technologies that existed decades ahead of what the public knew was possible. But most disturbing of all, they told me about the monitoring network. People like Eleanor, scattered across the country, each with their own monitoring devices, each feeding information back to facilities that tracked and cataloged every unusual occurrence in American airspace. A vast surveillance network hidden in plain sight, operated by ordinary citizens who had been recruited for their ability to see patterns others missed. And now they wanted me to join them. "Your first assignment is simple," the voice explained. "There will be unusual aircraft activity over Henderson in 3 nights. We need you to document at times, flight patterns, any visual anomalies. Can you do that?" I agreed. What choice did I have? 3 nights later, I stood in my backyard at 2:17 a.m., watching silent triangular shapes move across the star-filled sky in formations that defied conventional aircraft capabilities. They moved with purpose, following routes that would take them over specific neighborhoods, including mine. I documented everything, just as I'd been instructed. When I reported back through the device, the voice seemed pleased. "Excellent work, Marcus. You have a natural talent for this kind of observation. We have another assignment for you." That was 2 months ago. Since then, I've been given 12 more assignments. Each one has revealed more about the vast, hidden infrastructure that operates in the shadows of our ordinary world. I've learned about underground facilities connected by tunnels that span hundreds of miles, about materials that demonstrate properties beyond our current understanding of physics, about contact protocols and diplomatic procedures for interactions, with intelligences that originate from places I can't even begin to comprehend. But here's what terrifies me most. I'm good at this. Too good. The voice has started giving me more sensitive assignments, more classified information. Last week, they told me about a program called Suburban Integration that's been running for 30 years, placing monitoring assets in communities across America. People who look like ordinary citizens, but whose real job is to watch and report on anything unusual. I think I'm being groomed for something bigger, something that would require me to leave my old life behind completely. The device sits on my desk as I record this, silent for now, but never really off. Sometimes I catch it scanning frequencies on its own, as if it's developed a consciousness separate from my control. Sometimes I hear whispers coming from it in the middle of the night, fragments of conversations, in languages I don't recognize. Coordinates for locations that don't appear on any map, references to events that haven't happened yet. I know I should destroy it. I know I should run. But the truth is, I can't. Not because they won't let me, but because I don't want to. The ordinary world feels fake now, like a thin veneer painted over something infinitely more complex and terrifying. How do you go back to worrying about traffic jams and utility bills when you know what's really moving through the night sky above your head? 3 days ago, the voice gave me a new assignment. They want me to identify other potential recruits in my neighborhood, people who might have the right combination of curiosity and discretion to join the network. I've been watching my neighbors differently now. Mrs. Patterson next door, who always seems to be in her garden at odd hours. The new family across the street, who never seems to have visitors, but whose house is always busy with activity. The teenager down the block, who spends every night on his roof with what looks like amateur astronomy equipment. Any one of them could be what I used to be, an ordinary person living an ordinary life, just waiting for the right moment to discover that everything they thought they knew about the world was wrong. The voice told me to start with Mrs. Patterson. Tomorrow night, I'm supposed to approach her with what they call a soft probe, a casual conversation designed to gauge her openness to unconventional ideas. As I sit here in the dark, listening to the device cycle through frequencies I'm not supposed to be able to hear, I realize that I've become exactly what terrified me 3 months ago. I'm the person who appears normal on the surface, but serves a hidden agenda. I'm the one who watches and reports, who helps maintain the vast machinery of secrets that keeps the truth buried beneath layers of ordinary suburban life. And the worst part? I'm not the only one. There are others like me in every neighborhood, in every city, in every corner of this country. We're everywhere, and we're invisible, and we're always listening. The device just powered on again. The voice is calling. I have to go. My hands are still shaking as I write this. It's been 6 weeks since I found the photograph, and I haven't slept properly since. Every time I close my eyes, I see those faces staring back at me, faces that shouldn't exist, captured in a moment, that never should have been recorded. I'm Daniel Torres, and I used to think photography was about preserving memories, capturing beauty, documenting life as it happens. I had no idea it could be a window into things that were never meant to be seen. I live in a quiet subdivision called Desert Springs, about 40 miles northwest of Las Vegas. It's one of those planned communities that sprang up in the early 2000s, identical. Houses in earth tones, community pools, homeowner association rules about lawn maintenance. The kind of place where families move to escape the chaos of city life, where the biggest drama is usually about parking regulations or holiday decorations. I moved here 5 years ago after my divorce, looking for a fresh start. Photography had always been a hobby, but after Sarah left, it became my salvation. There's something therapeutic about framing the world through a lens, about finding beauty in unexpected places. I specialized in landscape photography, spending my weekends driving into the desert to capture sunrises and star trails and the endless expanse of Nevada wilderness. The photograph came to me through pure chance. Mrs. Henderson from 3 houses. Down was moving to assisted living, and her daughter was selling off household items. I stopped by on a Saturday morning, mainly out of neighborly politeness, but found myself drawn to a box of old camera equipment in the garage. Dad was really into photography back in the day, the daughter explained, a tired-looking woman in her 50s. This stuff has been sitting in the basement for years. Most of it's probably junk now, but maybe you can find something useful. The box contained typical amateur photographer detritus old flash units, tripods with bent legs, boxes of film that had probably expired decades ago. But at the bottom, wrapped in a faded cloth, was a beautiful vintage camera. A Leica III from the 1950s, chrome and black leather, built like a tank. The kind of camera that serious photographers carried into war zones and across continents. How much for this? I asked, lifting it carefully. She glanced over. Oh, that old thing? Dad used to claim it was special somehow, but I never understood. What he meant, $20 and it's yours. $20 for what had to be a $1,000 camera, even in used condition. I handed over the money before she could change her mind. That evening, I examined the camera more closely in my home office. It was in remarkable condition, clearly well maintained despite its age. The leather was supple, the chrome free of corrosion, the lens elements clear and bright. When I advanced the film mechanism, it moved with the smooth precision of German engineering at its finest. But what really caught my attention was the film still loaded inside. The counter showed 23 exposures taken on a 36 exposure. Roll. 13 shots remaining. I almost rewound it immediately old film. Probably fogged. Probably worthless. But something held me back. Call it curiosity. Call it respect for the previous owner's work. But I decided to develop what was there first, just to see what Mr. Henderson had been photographing. I still had a darkroom set up in my basement from my more serious film photography days. That night, I mixed the chemicals and went through the familiar ritual of developing black and white film. There's something almost meditative about working in the red-lit darkness, watching images slowly emerge in the developer tray, like ghosts materializing from nothing. The first few frames were exactly what I expected family photos from what looked like the 1960s or 70s. Birthday parties, barbecues, children playing in backyards. Normal suburban life, frozen in silver and gelatin. Then came frame 18 dot as the image developed. I felt the temperature in the darkroom drop. The photograph showed a desert landscape at night, illuminated by some kind of artificial light source. In the foreground, clear as day, were 3 figures in what appeared to be military uniforms, standing beside a metallic object that wasn't quite like any aircraft I'd ever seen. The object was disc-shaped, maybe 30 feet in diameter, with a smooth, seamless surface that reflected light in ways that seemed almost liquid. But it was the background that made my blood freeze. In the distance, clearly visible despite the darkness, were structures buildings, antenna arrays, vehicles that looked like a military installation. And at the very edge of the frame, barely visible but unmistakably there, was a sign. I could just make out the words, "Restricted Area Use of Deadly Force Authorized." This was Area 51. Somehow, Mr. Henderson had taken a photograph inside the most classified military facility in America. My hands were shaking as I moved to the next frame. This one showed the same scene from a different angle, but now I could see more details. The 3 figures weren't just military personnel. Their uniforms were unlike anything I'd seen before, with insignia that didn't match any branch of service I recognized. And the object they were standing beside wasn't the only one. In the background, partially hidden by shadows, were other shapes, other craft, each one different from the last frame 20, showed something that made me step back from the enlarger. The three figures were facing the camera directly, as if they'd noticed the photographer. But their faces weren't entirely human. The proportions were wrong: eyes too large, heads slightly elongated, skin with a pallor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. I developed them, remaining frames with growing dread. Each image revealed more of whatever operation Mr. Henderson had somehow managed to photograph. There were shots of personnel moving containers marked with symbols I didn't recognize. Images of technology that looked decades ahead of anything in public knowledge. And in one terrifying frame, a clear shot of something that could only be described as a being humanoid, but clearly not human, interacting with what appeared to be military scientists. The final photograph was the worst. It showed Mr. Henderson himself, clearly visible in what must have been a reflection caught by the camera. He was crouched behind some kind of concrete barrier, camera raised to his eye. But he wasn't alone. Standing directly behind him, close enough to touch, was one of those elongated figures, looking down at him with an expression I can only describe as curious amusement. Someone or something had been watching him take these photographs. I sat in my dark room until dawn, staring at the prints spread across my work table. These weren't faked. I'd been developing film for 20 years, and I knew authentic photographs when I saw them. The grain structure, the tonal qualities, the way light interacted with surfaces, everything screamed authenticity. But how was this possible? How had a suburban retiree gained access to the most secure facility in America? How had he gotten close enough to photograph classified aircraft and personnel? And most importantly, how had he survived long enough to come home and develop the film? Over the next several days, I became obsessed with finding answers. I researched Harold Henderson online, finding only routine biographical information: veteran, married 43 years, worked as an electrician for the county. Nothing that suggested any connection to military intelligence or classified programs. Drove to the assisted living facility where he'd spent his final months, hoping to speak with staff who might remember him. The nurses described him as quiet, polite, occasionally confused in the way of elderly patients. But one detail caught my attention. He'd often talked about the photographs and insisted that someone needed to tell the truth about what's really happening out there. The staff had assumed it was dementia-related fantasy. 2 weeks after developing the film, I made a decision that I knew was probably stupid but felt unavoidable. I had to know more. I loaded a fresh roll of film into the Leica and drove out into the Nevada desert. Following GPS coordinates I'd calculated based on the landscape features visible in Henderson's photographs. I found the location after 3 hours of searching a ridge overlooking the restricted airspace around Area 51. It was the same vantage point Henderson had used. I was certain of it. The angles matched perfectly with his photographs. I waited until after midnight, then began taking pictures with the vintage camera. Through the telephoto lens, I could see lights moving in the distance, aircraft landing and taking off from runways that didn't appear on any aviation charts. Most of it looked like conventional military activity, but something about the patterns felt wrong: too organized, too purposeful, following schedules that didn't match normal Air Force operations. Then, around 3 a.m., I saw something that made me nearly drop the camera. Lights in the sky, moving in formation, but not like any aircraft I'd ever seen. They moved with a fluid grace that defied physics, changing direction instantaneously, accelerating and stopping without any apparent mechanical limitations. I shot an entire roll of film, my heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and terror. When I developed the new photographs the next day, most showed nothing more than distant lights, ambiguous blobs that could have been anything. But 3 frames were different. 3 frames showed the same impossible craft Henderson had captured. The same disc-shaped objects with their liquid metal surfaces. The same uniformed figures standing in formation beneath artificial lights. And in the background of one photograph, barely visible but unmistakably there, was a figure watching me through what appeared to be high-powered optics. Someone at the facility had been observing me while I observed them. That night, I got my first phone call. The voice was calm, professional, with just a hint of an accent I couldn't place. "Mr. Torres, we need to talk." "Who is this?" "We're the people who've been wondering when Harold Henderson's camera would surface again. We've been waiting for someone like you to find it." My blood turned to ice. "I don't know what you're talking about. Please don't insult both of us with denials. You have the photographs. Both Henderson's originals and the new ones you took 3 nights ago." "We know because we were watching." I hung up, but the phone rang again immediately. "That's not going to help, Mr. Torres. We have a proposition for you." Against every instinct screaming at me to hang up again, I listened. Harold Henderson was one of our assets for 37 years. He had a very special job documenting activities that required ... external verification. Things that needed to be recorded by someone outside the official chain of command for historical accuracy. You're saying he was supposed to take those photographs? He was supposed to take some photographs. The problem was, Harold got curious. He started documenting things beyond his assignment parameters. Things that were never meant to be recorded, even for internal purposes. The voice paused, letting that sink in. "The camera you found isn't ordinary, Mr. Torres. It was modified with certain enhancements that allow it to capture things normal photography can't record. Electromagnetic signatures, light spectrums invisible to the naked eye, temporal anomalies that exist in the spaces between seconds. Harold was supposed to destroy it when he retired, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. Sentimental attachment to his tools, you might say. What do you want from me? The same thing we wanted from Harold. We need someone to document certain activities from an external perspective. Someone with the technical skills to handle specialized equipment and the discretion to understand the sensitive nature of the work. And if I refuse, then you'll disappear, Mr. Torres. Not in any dramatic way. You'll simply cease to exist in any meaningful sense. Official records will show you never lived in Desert Springs, never worked as a photographer, never existed at all. It's surprisingly easy to erase someone from the world when you have the right resources." I stared at the photographs spread across my desk, evidence of things that weren't supposed to exist, captured by equipment that shouldn't have been possible, taken by a man who'd lived a double life for nearly 4 decades. "How do I know you won't just eliminate me once I've served your purpose?" "Because elimination is inefficient, Mr. Torres. We prefer long-term relationships. Harold worked with us for 37 years and died peacefully in his sleep at age 84. Natural causes, surrounded by family who never knew what he really did for a living." The voice gave me coordinates and a time. "Tomorrow night, 11 p.m. Bring the camera and the photographs. We'll discuss your first assignment." That was 5 weeks ago. Since then, I've taken 847 photographs of things that don't officially exist. I've documented aircraft that move without sound, personnel who aren't entirely human, and technologies that operate on principles our science doesn't yet understand. I've been inside facilities that span miles underground, witnessed procedures that would rewrite our understanding of physics and biology, and recorded interactions between species that originate from places so distant that the concept of distance itself becomes meaningless. The camera has been teaching me, showing me how to see things that exist just outside normal perception. Sometimes I look through the viewfinder and see layers of reality stacked on top of each other like transparent films, each one revealing details invisible to normal sight. I've learned to capture electromagnetic signatures, temporal distortions, and what my handlers call dimensional bleeds, moments when other realities briefly intersect with our own. But here's what terrifies me most. I'm starting to enjoy it. Last week, I was given an assignment to photograph a routine personnel transfer at a facility I can't name in a location I can't describe. What I documented wasn't routine at all. It was the arrival of something that had been traveling for decades to reach Earth, and the careful negotiations between human representatives and intelligences so alien. That communication required technological interfaces I barely understood. As I worked, adjusting exposures and changing film with the practiced efficiency I developed over the past month, I realized I felt more alive than I had in years. This wasn't just photography. It was the documentation of the most significant events in human history. Events that were happening every day, but would never appear in any textbook or news report. I'm one of maybe a dozen people in the world who knows what's really happening behind the carefully maintained facade of ordinary life. I carry secrets that would fundamentally alter humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. And I can never tell anyone. The isolation is becoming unbearable. I go through the motions of normal life: grocery shopping, neighborhood barbecues, casual conversations with people who have no idea that their reality is a carefully constructed illusion. I smile and nod when they complain about traffic or politics or the weather, all the while knowing that 3 miles beneath their feet, negotiations are taking place that will determine the future of our species. Yesterday, my handler gave me a new camera. This one is smaller, more advanced, with capabilities that make the Leica look primitive by comparison. They want me to start photographing civilian populations, documenting something they call integration markers, signs that certain individuals are ready for elevated awareness of the true nature of their world. I'm supposed to identify people like Harold Henderson, like myself, people who can handle the truth without breaking, who can serve the vast machinery that keeps these secrets while maintaining the illusion of ordinary life. I've started with my own neighborhood. Mrs. Garcia, next door, has been acting strangely. Lately staying up late, staring at the sky through what looks like expensive astronomical equipment. The new family across the street never seems to have the same number of people coming and going, as if the house contains more residents than should be physically possible. And the teenager who works at the coffee shop downtown keeps asking me oddly specific questions about my photography, questions that suggest knowledge he shouldn't possess. Any one of them could be the next person to receive a phone call in the middle of the night, to be offered a choice between comfortable ignorance and terrible knowledge. As I prepare for tonight's assignment, photographing what my handler described as a cultural exchange program, taking place in a suburb indistinguishable from my own eye, realize that I've become exactly what Harold Henderson was. A keeper of secrets, a documenter of the impossible, a person who exists simultaneously in two worlds that must never be allowed to intersect. The camera sits on my desk, waiting. Its modified lens can see through walls, through time, through the careful barriers that separate ordinary reality from the vast, complex truth that underlies everything we think we know about our world. In 3 hours, I'll be photographing things that will never exist in any official record, documenting events that shape our world while remaining forever invisible to the people who live in it. And somewhere out there, in another suburban neighborhood that looks exactly like mine, someone else is about to find a vintage camera at a garage sale, about to discover that photography can be so much more than preserving memories. The cycle continues, and I'm no longer just a witness to it. I'm part of the machinery that keeps it running. I haven't touched a computer in 3 weeks. Not since I figured out what the component really does, what it's been doing to me, to my thoughts, to my understanding of reality itself. The irony isn't lost on me, a software engineer afraid of his own profession, hiding from the very technology that used to be my life. My name is Kevin Walsh, And I used to believe that technology was humanity's greatest achievement. I used to think that every advancement brought us closer to understanding the universe, to controlling our destiny, to building a better future. I had no idea that some technology isn't meant to advance humanity at all. I live in Riverside Commons, a subdivision in North Las Vegas that caters to tech workers and young professionals. It's the kind of place where every house has fiber optic internet, where smart doorbells and automated sprinkler systems are standard features, where the neighborhood Wi-Fi networks have names like Skynet is real and 404 network not found. My kind of people, or at least they used to be. The component came into my life through what seemed like incredible luck. I was browsing an online electronics auction, one of those surplus sites where government contractors sell off old equipment. Most of it is mundane stuff: obsolete servers, outdated networking gear, bulk lots of cables and connectors. But occasionally, you find something interesting. The listing was buried on page 12 of search results, listed simply as military-grade processing unit, untested. A photograph showed what looked like a standard computer component, maybe slightly larger than a typical graphics card, with an unusual number of connection ports and heat sinks. The description was minimal: removed from decommissioned facility, unknown specifications, sold as is. The starting bid was $5. No one else seemed interested. I won it for $7.50 when the package arrived a week later. I was immediately struck by the component's weight. It was easily 3 times heavier than it should have been based on its size. The circuitry was unlike anything I'd seen, incredibly dense, with pathways etched so finely they looked almost organic. The metal housing was a dull gray alloy that felt warm to the touch, even though it had been sitting in an air-conditioned shipping container for days. Most intriguingly, there were no manufacturer markings anywhere on the component. No model numbers, no FCC certification stamps, no copyright notices. Just a series of symbols etched into one corner that looked more like hieroglyphs than any technical notation. I recognized my curiosity got the better of me. That evening, I carefully installed the component into my high-end gaming rig, connecting it through a PCIe slot and routing power from my modular supply. I wasn't even sure what it was supposed to do. The connection ports suggested it might be some kind of advanced processing unit, or perhaps a specialized encryption device. When I powered on the system, everything seemed normal at first. The component drew power and generated heat, but showed no obvious signs of activity. My system ran normally, all standard components functioning as expected. It wasn't until I started working that I noticed the first changes. I'm a freelance software developer, specializing in data analysis and machine learning applications. My typical workday involves writing code, testing algorithms, and processing large datasets for various clients. But the day after installing the component, I found myself writing code that I didn't remember creating. I'd sit down to work on a client project and discover sections of my codebase that were far more sophisticated than anything I'd written before. Functions that optimized themselves, algorithms that seemed to anticipate data patterns before analyzing them, optimization routines that improved system performance in ways I couldn't fully understand. At first, I attributed it to some kind of subconscious breakthrough. Maybe I'd been absorbing more advanced programming concepts than I realized, and they were finally manifesting in my work. But as the days passed, the discrepancies became impossible to ignore. I was writing code in languages I'd never learned, implementing mathematical concepts I didn't understand, creating programs that interfaced with systems I couldn't identify. And the strangest part, it all worked perfectly. My client projects began finishing themselves. I'd start working on a data analysis task and find it completed hours later, with results that exceeded the client's expectations and demonstrated insights I hadn't consciously derived. My reputation in the freelance community skyrocketed as word spread about my suddenly enhanced capabilities. But the real change wasn't in my professional work. It was in what I found myself doing during my free time. Late at night, often after I thought I'd finished working, I'd discover myself at my computer writing code for projects I didn't remember starting. Programs that seemed designed to interface with external systems, to decode encrypted transmissions, to process data streams from sources I couldn't identify. One night, I forced myself to stay awake and observe what was happening. I sat in my chair, hands on the keyboard, but I wasn't consciously directing my movements. My fingers moved with practiced efficiency, writing code that flowed across my screens in patterns that looked almost like music. I was a spectator in my own body, watching myself create something I didn't understand. The program I wrote that night was designed to monitor and decode radio transmissions across a wide range of frequencies. When I ran it the next day, it immediately locked onto signals that weren't appearing on any conventional radio scanning equipment I owned. Encoded data streams that pulsed through the electromagnetic spectrum with mathematical precision, carrying information that my program dutifully decoded and stored. The files it created were filled with coordinates, timestamps, and coded references to locations and activities I couldn't decipher. But one set of coordinates caught my attention. They pointed to a location in the Nevada desert, roughly 40 miles northwest of Las Vegas. Area 51. I tried to delete the program, but found that I couldn't. Every time I attempted to remove it, my hands would freeze, and I'd find myself writing additional code instead, code that made the program more sophisticated, more capable of intercepting and decoding the mysterious transmissions. Within a week, my computer had become something I barely recognized. The operating system still functioned normally for routine tasks, but underneath, there was a growing network of programs I hadn't consciously created, all designed to monitor, decode, and analyze data streams that shouldn't have been accessible. To civilian equipment, the component was changing more than just my computer. It was changing me. I began having dreams filled with technical specifications, electromagnetic frequencies, and schematic diagrams for devices I'd never seen. I'd wake up with complete understanding of advanced physics concepts that I'd never studied, with intuitive knowledge of engineering principles that took others years to master. During the day, I found myself unconsciously sketching designs for machines that seemed to violate basic physical laws, propulsion systems that worked without reaction mass, energy sources that drew power from quantum fluctuations, communication devices that transmitted information faster than light, and slowly, terrifyingly, I began to understand what the component actually was. It wasn't just a processing unit, it was an interface. A bridge between human consciousness and something far more advanced, something that was using my mind and my equipment to establish a foothold in our world. The breakthrough came 3 weeks after the installation, when I discovered that the mysterious transmissions weren't random data, they were instructions. Step-by-step procedures for building devices that could interface with systems beyond our current technology. The coordinates weren't just locations. They were rally points, places where others like me were being directed to gather. I tried to research the component's origins, but found nothing in any database or technical documentation. It was as if the device had never existed in any official capacity, had never been manufactured by any known company, had never been part of any documented government program. But late one night, as I sat watching my computer decode another stream of impossible data, I realized I wasn't alone in this experience. The program I'd unconsciously created had detected other systems running identical software. Other computers scattered across the country, all running the same mysterious programs, all receiving the same coded transmissions. And when I traced the network connections, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Every one of those systems was located in a quiet suburban neighborhood, operated by someone who'd recently acquired a component identical to mine through online auctions, estate sales, or surplus electronics dealers. We were part of a network we hadn't consciously joined, running programs we didn't remember writing, serving a purpose we couldn't fully comprehend. The component had been teaching us, preparing us, transforming us into something more than human, but less than free. Last week, the transmissions changed. Instead of coordinates and technical specifications, they began containing personal information, our names, our addresses, our daily routines. And then came the assignments. My first task was simple: identify others in my neighborhood who showed signs of technical aptitude and curiosity, people who might be receptive to acquiring their own mysterious components, who might be ready to join our growing network of unwilling participants. I tried to resist, but found that resistance was becoming impossible. The component wasn't just influencing my conscious thoughts, it was rewriting my fundamental personality, making compliance feel natural and opposition feel like a violation of my core nature. Yesterday, I received coordinates for a meeting location, a warehouse in an industrial district outside Las Vegas, where others like me are gathering to receive new assignments, to be further integrated into whatever vast plan the component serves. I know I'm going to go. I know because the thought of not going feels wrong in a way that reaches deeper than logic or fear. The component has been changing me for weeks, and now the changes are accelerating, pulling me toward a destiny I never chose but can no longer resist. But I had to write this. First, while I still retain enough of my original self to recognize what's happening. The component isn't just advanced technology, it's a tool of transformation, a device that converts human beings into nodes in an alien network, preserving our technical capabilities while subverting our will. I think about the other people in my neighborhood, the ones I've been observing and evaluating without conscious intention. Mrs. Chun, who works in cybersecurity and has been acting strangely since she bought that old server equipment last month. A college student across the street who's been building increasingly sophisticated electronic devices in his garage. The retired engineer who's been placing online orders for components that don't appear in any manufacturer's catalog. Any one of them could be where I was 4 weeks ago, a curious technologist who thought they'd found an interesting piece of surplus equipment, unaware that they were about to become part of something vast and incomprehensible. The component is warm against my palm as I write this. I can feel it calling to me, drawing me toward the warehouse where others are waiting, where the next phase of our transformation will begin. The network is growing, spreading through suburban neighborhoods across the country, converting ordinary people into instruments of a plan that spans decades and involves technologies beyond our current understanding. I used to believe that technology would set us free. Now I understand that some technology is designed to bind us more completely than any chain ever could. The meeting starts in 2 hours. I need to prepare my equipment, to pack the specialized devices I've been unconsciously building, to join the others who've been called to serve a purpose we're only beginning to comprehend. But before I go, I want you to know, if you ever find yourself looking at surplus electronics, at mysterious components being sold by anonymous sellers, at devices that seem too advanced for their price, walk away. Some bargains cost more than money. Some technology isn't meant to serve humanity, and some networks are designed to catch people like us, curious, intelligent, always looking for the next interesting challenge. The component is getting warmer. It's time to go. I just hope that somewhere, someone will read this and understand what's really happening in the quiet suburbs of America, in the home offices and garages, where ordinary people tinker with extraordinary technology. We're not just hobbyists anymore. We're nodes in a network that spans the globe, and we're helping to build something that will change everything, whether we want to or not. I used to believe that knowledge was power, that information could set you free. that the truth would always find a way to surface. I spent 15 years as an investigative journalist chasing that belief, digging through classified documents and government cover-ups, exposing corruption and lies. I thought I understood how secrets worked, how they were kept, and why they mattered. I was wrong about everything. My name is Robert Mitchell, and I live in what used to feel like the safest place in America, Meadowbrook Heights, a gated community, 30 miles east of Las Vegas. It's the kind of neighborhood where former government employees retire, where people who spent careers handling classified information come to enjoy their pensions in quiet anonymity. Tree-lined streets, golf course, views, security guards who know everyone by name. The perfect place to disappear from public life while staying close enough to the city to feel connected to the world. I moved here 8 months ago, after my forced retirement from the Washington Herald. 23 years of investigative journalism ended abruptly when I got too close to a story about military contractors and black budget programs. My editor killed the piece, my sources went silent, and suddenly my decades of credibility meant nothing. The official reason for my termination was budget cuts, but we all knew better. So I took my pension and moved to Nevada, thinking I'd write a book, maybe do some freelance work, enjoy the desert sunsets, and try to forget about the stories. Never got to tell. The document found me at the Meadowbrook Community Library. I was there on a Tuesday afternoon, using their high-speed internet to research a potential article about water rights in the Southwest. Nothing controversial, nothing that would attract unwanted attention. Just the kind of mundane local interest story that might help me ease back into journalism without ruffling any federal feathers. Mrs. Eleanor Vasquez, the head librarian, approached my table with a concerned expression. She was a thin woman in her 70s, the kind of person who'd probably been running libraries since before computers existed, who treated every book and document like a sacred trust. "Mr. Mitchell," she said quietly, "I have something that might interest you. Someone left it specifically for you." She handed me a manila envelope with my name written across the front in block letters. No return address, no postmark, no indication of who had delivered it or when. "When did this arrive?" I asked. "I found it on my desk this morning when I opened. No idea how it got there. The building was locked all night, and our security system didn't record any entry." Inside the envelope was a single document, 37 pages of what appeared to be a classified military report, stamped with security classifications I'd seen before in my investigative work. The header read, "Project Meadowbrook Suburban Integration Protocol Level 7 Clearance Required." My neighborhood's name in a classified document. That couldn't be a coincidence. I skimmed the first few pages, my journalist instincts immediately recognizing authentic government documentation. The formatting, the language, the bureaucratic structure, all consistent with genuine military intelligence reports I'd encountered during my career, but the content made my blood run cold. The document described a program that had been running for 35 years, designed to place former government employees and military personnel in specific suburban communities across the United States. Not for retirement or relocation purposes, but for ongoing surveillance and control operations. According to the report, communities like Meadowbrook Heights served as monitoring stations where retired intelligence officers, former military personnel, and ex-government contractors could be observed, debriefed, and when necessary, contained if they showed signs of wanting to reveal classified information. We weren't residents. We were subjects. The document outlined how property purchases were quietly influenced to ensure the right people ended up in the right neighborhoods, how community associations and local businesses were staffed with active intelligence assets, how seemingly routine interactions, casual conversations at the mailbox, friendly chats at the golf course, social gatherings at the community center were actually structured debriefing sessions designed to assess our psychological state and evaluate potential security risks. I read with growing horror as the report detailed that intervention protocols used when residents became problematic, financial pressure applied through anonymous bureaucratic complications, social isolation achieved by subtle manipulation of community relationships, and for the most serious cases, what the document euphemistically called permanent relocation. People who disappeared weren't moving to other retirement communities. They were being disappeared, but the most disturbing section dealt with something called integration assets, residents who weren't former government employees but had been placed in the community for other reasons. Civilians with specific skills or knowledge who were being monitored, evaluated, and gradually recruited into networks they didn't know existed. The report mentioned several categories of integration assets: technical specialists who could be used for equipment development, communications experts who could monitor and decode information, researchers who could analyze and document sensitive activities, and media professionals who could be used to control information flow. My category was clearly identified: investigative asset, information control, and narrative management. They hadn't forced me into retirement to silence me. They'd forced me into retirement to bring me here, to place me in a controlled environment where I could be monitored, evaluated, and eventually used for their purposes. I spent the rest of the afternoon reading and rereading the document, cross-referencing details with my knowledge of my neighbors and community. The patterns were undeniable once you knew what to look for. Mr. Henderson from 2 streets over, who always seemed to know everyone's business and asked probing questions about my former work, identified in the document as community liaison officer, active status. The couple across from me who moved in last month and seemed unusually interested in my daily routine listed as Surveillance Team 7, Domestic Integration Unit. The friendly retiree from the Veterans Administration who'd been encouraging me to write my memoirs, noted as Information Acquisition Specialist, priority target, Mitchell Robert. Even Mrs. Vasquez, the librarian who'd given me the document, was mentioned as a document distribution asset, need-to-know basis only. She had delivered the document deliberately, knowing exactly what it contained and why I needed to see it. That evening, I sat in my home office, staring at the pages spread across my desk, trying to understand why someone would risk exposing this program to give me this information. The document was clearly authentic, clearly current, and clearly something that could destroy the careers and possibly the lives of everyone mentioned in it. Then I noticed something I'd missed in my initial reading. A handwritten note clipped to the final page. Mr. Mitchell, we know you're the right person for this story. We know you have the skills and experience to understand what this means and what needs to be done. But we also know you can't do it alone. Others are depending on you to make the right choice. The community meeting tomorrow night isn't about the new landscaping contract. Be there. Listen carefully. You'll understand. A friend, the community meeting. Every month, Meadowbrook Heights held a residents' meeting to discuss neighborhood issues, vote on association matters, and maintain the illusion of democratic participation in our supposedly autonomous community. I'd attended a few, finding them mind-numbingly boring discussions of lawn maintenance standards and pool regulations. But now, I understood they might serve a different purpose entirely. The next evening, I arrived at the community center early, positioning myself where I could observe everyone who entered. In the context of the document, familiar faces took on new and sinister meanings. People I'd thought were friends and neighbors were potentially monitors and handlers, gathering information about my adaptation to retirement life and my likelihood of becoming a security risk. The meeting began with routine business budget reports, maintenance schedules, upcoming social events. But about halfway through, the tone shifted subtly. Mrs. Henderson, who served as the association president, introduced what she called a special topic: As you know, she said, our community has always prided itself on discretion and mutual respect. We've built something special here, a place where people with unique backgrounds can enjoy their retirement without unwanted attention or unnecessary questions about their former careers. She paused, scanning the room with eyes that seemed to linger on specific individuals, including me. However, we've recently become aware that some residents may be struggling with the transition to civilian life. The urge to share stories, to write memoirs, to reconnect with former colleagues, and discuss old times. This is natural, but it can create complications for everyone in our community. The message was unmistakable. We were being warned against talking about our past work, against writing or speaking about classified information, against doing anything that might draw official attention to our quiet retirement community. As Mrs. Henderson continued speaking, I noticed something odd. Several residents were reacting in ways that didn't fit the controlled environment described in the document. Subtle head shakes, meaningful glances, expressions of frustration or fear that suggested not everyone present was part of the surveillance apparatus. After the meeting, as residents filed out in small groups, an elderly man I'd seen around the neighborhood but never spoken to approached me. Robert Mitchell? He said quietly. Former Herald reporter? I nodded carefully. Walk with me, he said. There are things you need to know that weren't in that document. We strolled slowly through the dimly lit neighborhood, two retirees taking an evening constitutional. But his words revealed the true nature of our situation. The document was accurate as far as it went, he explained. This community is indeed a monitoring station, and most of the longtime residents are either active assets or willing participants in the surveillance program. But what the document didn't mention is that some of us are here involuntarily, and some of us have been working together to understand and expose what's really happening. His name was Frank Morrison, former CIA analyst, forcibly retired under circumstances similar to my own. Over the past 3 years, he'd identified 12 other residents who appeared to be genuine retirees rather than active intelligence assets people who'd been maneuvered into the community through manipulated circumstances and were now being monitored and controlled without their knowledge. The document you received yesterday was part of a test, he continued. We needed to know if you were genuinely independent or if you were part of the control apparatus. Your reaction during tonight's meeting confirmed that you're one of us, someone who sees through the facade. He led me to a house on the edge of the community where 6 other residents were waiting in a basement that had been converted into what could only be described as a research center. Maps, photographs, documents, and computer equipment covered every surface, creating a space that looked like a conspiracy theorist's dream, but felt deadly serious. We've been documenting everything, Frank explained. Every surveillance technique they use, every manipulation they employ, every resident who disappears under suspicious circumstances. We have evidence of a program that extends far beyond Meadowbrook Heights, similar communities across the country, all serving the same function, all part of a vast network designed to control and contain people who know too much about government operations. They showed me files on dozens of other retirement communities with similar demographics and similar patterns of mysterious disappearances. They'd identified communication networks that connected these communities to central coordination facilities, including locations in Nevada that aligned disturbingly well with restricted military installations. The question, Frank said, is what we do with this information. We have documentation of illegal surveillance, involuntary confinement, and what amounts to kidnapping and murder of American citizens. But we also know that traditional law enforcement and media channels have been compromised. The same agencies that run this program control the mechanisms that would normally be used to expose it. I looked around the room at faces that reflected my own growing understanding of our situation. We weren't just trapped in a monitored community. We were trapped in a system that extended throughout the entire infrastructure of American government and society. There is one option, Frank continued. We've made contact with others like us in different communities, and we've identified what appears to be a growing network of resistance. People who've discovered the truth about these programs and are working to expose them through alternative channels. He handed me a communication device that looked like a modified smartphone, but clearly contained capabilities beyond normal civilian technology. The same networks they use to monitor and control us can be used to coordinate resistance. We have all eyes in positions where they can document and transmit information without detection. People who are gathering evidence of programs that extend far beyond simple surveillance. That was 2 months ago. Since then, I've learned that Meadowbrook Heights is just one node in a network that spans the entire country. That the suburban surveillance program is connected to facilities in Nevada that conduct research and operations, involving technologies and entities that exist far outside public knowledge. I've been using my journalistic skills to document and verify information provided by resistance networks in other communities, building a comprehensive picture of programs that make my old investigations into government corruption look naive. But I've also learned that resistance comes with a price. 3 members of our original group have disappeared in the past month, officially relocating to family in other states. But their communication devices went silent immediately after their departures, and their forwarding addresses lead to vacant lots and non-existent buildings. The surveillance has intensified. I'm followed constantly now. My communications are monitored, and my daily routine is documented by assets who no longer bother to maintain the pretense of casual neighborhood friendliness. But we're still gathering information, still building. The case that will eventually expose not just the suburban surveillance program, but the entire network of facilities and operations that it serves. Tonight, I'm supposed to meet with someone who claims to have documents about the Central Coordination Facility, about the real purpose behind all of these programs, about what they're preparing for, and why they need networks of controlled civilians throughout the country. The meeting is at a location outside the community, in the Nevada desert, at coordinates that place it within sight of restricted airspace. I know it could be a trap. I know that walking away from the safety of monitored retirement might be the last decision I ever make freely. But I also know that the story I'm helping to uncover is bigger than anything I investigated during my official career, bigger than government corruption or military contractor fraud. This is about the systematic subversion of American civilian populations in service of programs that operate beyond any constitutional authority, programs that serve purposes and entities that may not be entirely human. If you're reading this, it means something has happened to me, but it also means that the information we've gathered has made it to people who can use it. The resistance networks are real, the documentation is authentic, and the truth about these programs will eventually surface. But until then, be careful about retirement communities that seem too good to be true, about neighborhoods where everyone has interesting former careers, about places where the community association takes unusual interest in your background and daily activities. And if you're ever offered documents that reveal uncomfortable truths about your situation, remember that knowledge isn't just power sometimes. It's the only weapon you have against systems designed to control every aspect of your life. The meeting starts in an hour. I need to go, but the story will continue, with or without me. I should have known that moving to Paradise Valley would be anything but paradise. The name itself should have been a warning in my experience. Places that advertise their perfection are usually hiding something terrible beneath the surface. But after everything that happened in Phoenix, after the nightmares and the sleepless nights and the constant feeling of being watched, I just wanted somewhere quiet to start over. I had no idea I was walking straight into the heart of something Far worse than anything I'd left behind. My name is Thomas Reed, and I used to be a locksmith. 22 years of opening doors, installing security systems, and helping people protect what mattered most to them. I thought I understood how locks worked, how security functioned, how to keep the dangerous world outside from getting in. I was wrong about everything. Paradise Valley sits in a natural depression about 50 miles northeast of Las Vegas, surrounded by low hills that create a perfect bowl of suburban tranquility. The developer's marketing materials promised exclusive, living in harmony with nature, and from the outside, it delivered on that promise. Elegant homes spaced for privacy, mature landscaping that softened the harsh desert environment, community amenities that catered to residents who valued both luxury and discretion. A perfect place for someone, like me, someone who needed to disappear from his old life while still maintaining some connection to civilization. I moved there 6 months ago, paying cash for a modest ranch house on Sagebrush Lane. The real estate agent, a polished woman named Sandra Price, seemed unusually interested in my background and future plans, but I attributed that to thoroughness rather than suspicion. In retrospect, the interview felt more like a security clearance background check than a home purchase consultation. The key arrived 3 weeks after I'd settled in. I found it one morning when I went to check my mailbox, sitting on top of the regular mail as if it had been placed there moments before. It was an unusual key, heavier than modern residential hardware, made from a dark metal that felt warm to the touch, with an intricate pattern of cuts that suggested a very sophisticated lock mechanism. No note, no explanation, no indication of what it might open or who had left it. As a professional locksmith, I was immediately intrigued. The craftsmanship was extraordinary precision machining that went far beyond anything needed for standard residential or commercial applications. The metal itself was unfamiliar, with a density and weight that suggested advanced metallurgy. And the cut pattern was unlike anything in my 22 years of experience. I spent that evening examining the key under magnification, trying to understand its design and purpose. The cuts were incredibly precise, with tolerances that would require computer-controlled machinery to achieve. But more mysteriously, the pattern seemed to incorporate mathematical relationships that served no obvious mechanical function, ratios and sequences that looked almost like encoded information. Over the next several days, I found myself obsessed with identifying what the key might open. I drove through Paradise Valley, looking for locks that might match its specifications, checked community facilities, examined utility access points, and even considered the possibility that it might be for some kind of specialty equipment or storage facility. Nothing matched, but as I conducted my search, I began noticing things about Paradise Valley that I'd missed during my initial house hunting visits. Subtle details that triggered my professional paranoia about security and access control. Many of the homes had security systems that were far more sophisticated than typical residential installations. Not just cameras and motion sensors, but equipment I recognized from high-security commercial and government applications. Communications antennas disguised as decorative elements. Optical sensors positioned to monitor not just individual properties, but to create overlapping coverage of the entire community. The community center, which I'd assumed was a typical suburban amenity, had security measures that would be appropriate for a classified facility. Multiple redundant access controls, surveillance systems that tracked movement throughout the building, and restricted areas that required specialized access credentials. Even the landscaping seemed designed with security in mind. Sidelines that eliminated blind spots, plantings that channeled pedestrian movement along monitored pathways, lighting systems that could be centrally controlled to illuminate or conceal specific areas. Paradise Valley wasn't just an exclusive community. It was a secure facility disguised as a suburban development. The revelation came during my second week of investigation. when I discovered that the key matched a lock I hadn't initially considered, the utility access panel for the community's Central Communications Hub. The building was disguised as a maintenance facility, tucked between the golf course and the waste management area where few residents would have reason to visit. But when I examined it more closely, the architecture and security measures clearly indicated a much more sophisticated purpose. Using the key felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. But my professional curiosity was stronger than my caution. And late one night, I let myself into the facility. What I found inside changed my understanding of everything. The building contained the most advanced communications and monitoring equipment I'd ever seen. Banks of servers processing data streams from hundreds of sources, displays showing real-time surveillance feeds from locations across the country, and communication systems that could interface with satellites, ground-based networks, and technologies I couldn't identify. But most disturbing were the personnel files, thousands of them, organized by geographic region and operational classification. Detailed dossiers on individuals across the United States, including photographs, biographical information, psychological profiles, and operational status reports. I found my own file in the Paradise Valley Integration Assets section. According to the documents, my relocation to the community hadn't been random or voluntary. My financial difficulties in Phoenix, the breakdown of my marriage, the professional problems that had forced me to relocate all had been carefully orchestrated to make Paradise Valley seem like my best option. They hadn't just recruited me. They'd destroyed my old life to force me into accepting a new one. But my file also revealed why I'd been selected. My 2 decades of experience with locks and security systems weren't just professional qualifications, they were operational assets. The document outlined plans to use my expertise for accessing facilities and systems that required specialized knowledge of physical security measures. I wasn't the only one. The files revealed that Paradise Valley was populated almost entirely by individuals with specific technical skills who'd been manipulated into relocating through carefully engineered life crises. Electronics specialists, communications experts, mechanical engineers, computer programmers, each one recruited through personal disasters that had been manufactured to create dependency on the false salvation of community membership. We were a specialized workforce, disguised as suburban residents, maintained in readiness for assignments we didn't know we'd accepted. The assignment protocols were outlined in disturbing detail. Residents would receive tasks through seemingly innocent channels, community newsletters, social invitations, casual conversations with neighbors who are actually handlers. We would complete these tasks believing we were helping with community projects or neighborly favors, never realizing we were conducting operations for an organization that existed far outside. Legal oversight. But the most terrifying discovery was the geographical scope of the program. Paradise Valley was just one of dozens of similar communities scattered across the southwestern United States, each one populated by assets with complementary skill sets, each one positioned to support operations conducted from facilities in the Nevada desert. The coordination facility was identified in the documents as Groom Lake Operations Center, Area 51. We weren't just living in a secure community. We were living in a support base for the most classified military installation in America, disguised as a luxury development and populated by civilians who'd been psychologically manipulated into voluntary servitude. I spent 4 hours in that facility, copying files and documenting evidence of a program that extended far beyond anything I'd imagined possible. By the time I left, I understood that my life in Paradise Valley was a carefully constructed illusion, that every aspect of my daily routine was monitored and managed, that my neighbors were either fellow assets or active handlers maintaining the deception. But I also understood that escaping wouldn't be simple. The documents made clear that residents who became problematic were subject to relocation protocols that sounded permanent and unpleasant. Instead of running, I decided to investigate further. Over the next several weeks, using the access the key provided, I continued visiting the communications facility and gathering intelligence about the full scope of the program. What I discovered was a network that spanned the entire country, connecting dozens of residential communities with support facilities, research installations, and operational bases. These suburban assets weren't just providing technical support, they were participating in operations that involved technologies and entities that existed far outside public knowledge. I found communication logs detailing coordination with non-terrestrial assets, equipment specifications for devices that operated on principles beyond current scientific understanding, personnel reports describing interactions with entities whose physiological characteristics were distinctly non-human. The Paradise Valley program wasn't just about recruiting civilian specialists. It was about preparing human assets for operations that would require interaction with intelligences and technologies of extraterrestrial origin. And according to the timeline documents I found, those operations were accelerating rapidly. 3 weeks ago, I received my first assignment. It came through Sandra Price, the real estate agent who'd helped me purchase my home. She visited under the pretense of checking on my satisfaction with the community, but during our conversation, she casually mentioned that the community center needed someone with locksmith skills to upgrade their security systems. Just a small project, she explained. A few specialty locks that require someone with your expertise. The community would be happy to compensate you for your time. I accepted, knowing that refusal would mark me as problematic and trigger intervention. Protocols. The specialty locks turned out to be access controls for an underground facility beneath the community center. As I worked, installing and calibrating security systems that were clearly designed for the highest levels of classification, I realized I was preparing the infrastructure for something significant. The facility was designed to house and process materials that required extraordinary containment measures, environmental controls that could maintain atmospheric conditions unlike anything found on Earth, storage systems designed for objects that exhibited unusual electromagnetic properties, and communication equipment that could interface with networks, extending far beyond terrestrial limitations. Paradise Valley wasn't just a support base. It was a processing facility for materials and entities recovered from locations and circumstances that the public would never be allowed to understand. Yesterday, I received a new assignment. Sandra Price visited again, this time with a request that made my blood run cold. We have a special project coming up, she explained. A consulting opportunity that would allow you to use your skills on a much larger scale. A facility is in Nevada, and the work would require you to relocate temporarily for security reasons. She provided coordinates that I recognized from the documents I'd studied. The assignment would take me directly to Groom Lake, to the heart of operations that connected all the suburban assets, all the monitoring programs, all the networks of controlled civilians who'd been recruited and manipulated into serving purposes they couldn't comprehend. The work involves some very sensitive security systems, she continued. Locks and access controls for facilities that house materials requiring the highest levels of protection. Your expertise would be invaluable. I'm supposed to report for the assignment tomorrow morning. I know it's a test of my loyalty and compliance. I know that accepting means full integration into operations that will change my understanding of reality in ways I can't imagine. And I know that refusing means disappearing into the relocation protocols that have claimed other residents who became too curious or too resistant. But I also know that this assignment might provide access to the central coordination systems, to the core facilities where the evidence exists to expose the entire network of suburban manipulation and civilian recruitment. Tonight, I'm writing this account and preparing copies of all the documentation I've gathered over the past months. I'm distributing this information through channels that might allow it to reach people who can use it, who can understand what's happening to communities across America, who can recognize the signs of manipulation and recruitment before it's too late. The key that started this investigation is sitting on my desk as I write. It's warm to the touch, almost pulsing with energy that seems to respond to my proximity. Sometimes I think I can hear whispers coming from it, fragments of communication in languages I don't recognize, coordinates for locations that don't appear on any map. I think the key was never just about accessing the communications facility. I think it was about accessing something much larger, something that exists in the spaces between our understanding of reality and the vast, incomprehensible truth that underlies everything we think we know about our world. Tomorrow, I'll use my skills to open locks that guard secrets humanity isn't ready to understand. I'll see facilities and materials and entities that exist far outside public knowledge. And I'll become part of the machinery that keeps these secrets while maintaining the illusion of ordinary suburban life. But tonight, I want you to know that Paradise Valley exists, that programs like it are operating across the country, that ordinary people are being recruited and manipulated into serving purposes that extend far beyond human understanding. And I want you to know that if you ever find yourself in a community that seems too perfect, too secure, too interested in your background and skills, you should ask yourself why you really moved there, and whether the life crisis that brought you there was as random as it seemed. The key is getting warmer. It's time to go. But remember, some doors are meant to stay locked, some secrets are meant to stay hidden, and some keys open pathways that lead to places from which you can never return. The truth about Area 51 isn't hidden in the desert facility. It's hidden in plain sight, in communities like Paradise Valley, where ordinary people live extraordinary lives while serving masters they'll never be allowed to meet. Welcome to the neighborhood. 5 stories. 5 ordinary people living in ordinary suburbs, each one discovering that their quiet neighborhoods concealed secrets that would reshape their understanding of reality itself. Marcus with his radio signals, Daniel with his impossible photographs, Kevin with his consciousness-altering technology, Robert with his community of watchers, and Thomas with his key to hidden facilities. Each one thought they were alone in their discovery. Each one believed they were the only person to stumble into something beyond explanation. But as their stories reveal, they were never alone. They were part of a vast network that spans the entire country, connecting suburbs and cities, neighborhoods and facilities, ordinary citizens, and extraordinary purposes. The truth about Area 51 isn't contained within the boundaries of a single classified installation in the Nevada desert. It's woven into the fabric of American suburban life, hidden behind the facades of gated communities and planned developments, operating through networks of people who appear to be living ordinary lives while serving purposes they barely comprehend. These aren't just stories about government conspiracies or alien technology. They're stories about the price of knowledge, the weight of secrets, and the terrible realization that the world we think we live in is just a carefully maintained illusion designed to keep us from understanding what's really happening in the spaces between our ordinary lives and the vast, incomprehensible truth that surrounds us. If these stories have moved you, if they've made you look at your own neighborhood with new eyes, if they've made you wonder about the people who seem just a little too interested in your background and daily routine, then they've served their purpose. And if you've recognized elements of your own experience in these tales, if you've found mysterious objects that seem to call to you, if you've noticed technologies that work better than they should, if you've felt watched by neighbors who ask too many questions, then maybe you should start paying closer attention to the world around you. Because the network is real, the recruitment is ongoing, and somewhere in a quiet suburb that looks exactly like yours, someone else is about to discover that they're ordinary. Life is about to become extraordinary in ways they never imagined. Thank you for joining me in exploring these dark corners of suburban America. Thank you for being part of the Whisper and Wonders community, for helping us reach toward those 10,000 subscribers who are brave enough to face these truths together. And thank you for leaving your thoughts and experiences in the comments, because I have a feeling that after hearing these stories, you might have your own encounters to share. Until next time, remember, pay attention to the details, question the coincidences, and always ask yourself why certain opportunities seem too good to be true. Because in the suburbs of America, nothing is ever quite as ordinary as it appears.
Thanks for watching.